I'm grateful for this legislation. As the mayor mentioned, in development, time is money. I think the Space Needle was built in 400 days. Sometimes it takes more than 4 years to get some of our housing projects done. We can do better.
That's John Scholes, President and CEO of the Downtown Seattle Association, talking about a new ordinance for the city of Seattle that will waive design review requirements for buildings downtown for the next 3 years. What's that going to mean for downtown development? And can it turn around a trend of construction in Seattle that's lagging behind where the city was pre-pandemic? Plus, we're just a few months away from Amazon, our city's biggest employer, enforcing a requirement to have its workers in office 5 days a week. How will that affect our local economy, which, according to the City of Seattle's forecast, is facing some challenges in the years ahead? We are discussing these topics and a whole lot more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are mine. My usual co-host, David Croman, is on leave, and so I am happy to have with me John Scholes, President and CEO of the Downtown Seattle Association with me. John, I should have mentioned you're also the host of the Seattle City Makers podcast. How has that been going for you?
It's been a ton of fun. Thanks for the plug. We're in our third season and talking to folks in arts and culture, real estate, business, across a variety of sectors, people who shape the experience that we have here in Seattle. So it's a great way to get to know folks in a lot of different spaces in our city. So we're having fun with it.
Yeah, and we have a question for you, John, about that at the end of the podcast. So, folks, make sure you stick around for that. One of our patrons had a great question for you here. So, thank you, John. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. It's on the first floor of City Hall, of course. Thanks also to my show patrons. Jan just became a patron last week. Thank you very much. And I do have some good news to everybody who's been contacting me. Councilmember Dan Strauss has announced he will make full funding for the Seattle Channel part of his budget balancing package. So it's looking like my job at the channel is back online. We'll see what happens next. I'll keep you posted. If you want to be a patron, get a snazzy decal like this one. You can access patrons first content also on the program before anybody else. Please support the show on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. I'm also thankful for Converge Media. The video version of the podcast airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get the party started. Time for Right Here, Right Now. John, I wanted to jump on this most recent headline with you first about design review exemptions happening downtown. Quick background here, folks. This legislation from the city provides this exemption for 3 years for residential, hotel, and research and development projects in downtown, South Lake Union, Lower Queen Anne, First Hill, and part of the Greater Duwamish Manufacturing and Industrial Center. Had to get all that out. Design review is a process that projects go through to assess their design quality, how compatible they'll be with nearby development. Exempting these projects will likely cut 6 to 9 months off the planning process for these buildings, which should allow them to start construction a lot quicker. John, I just wanted to ask you big picture, what impact do you think this legislation is going to have?
I think it's going to be a positive one on allowing more investment and development of housing, of hotels, of research space in our city. That's a good thing. And any time we can save is money that we're saving in the production of those much needed spaces and projects. And when those projects are built and developed, that's sales tax that's being spent on the materials. It's family wage jobs and for the workers who are building those buildings. And then ultimately it's places for people to live or work and locations for small businesses, which provides ongoing tax revenue. So cutting the length of time it takes to build things in our city is a really good thing. And we know that people want to continue to invest in our city, so we should make it easier for them to do so.
Got it. And just in terms of how projects will be processed now, they'll go through the permit process with Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, SDCI, and the employees there will make sure that design standards are met. Is that how this is going to work? What's your understanding of that?
Yeah, it's not as if design standards go completely out the window.
Right. There's going to be people looking at this. Okay.
There's still design standards, but this review period and an outside review that I think added about 9 months or so to different projects will not be required. And I think we can, give credit to this process and the people that have served on these review boards over the years for raising the bar on design in Seattle. I think we have good design in Seattle. We have great designers, and we should all expect great design. But we also are trying to balance affordability and the probability that somebody's going to make an investment in our city when the length of time it has taken in the past is 4+ years to get some of these projects done. So we're trying to balance a lot of different variables, and I think this gets us in better balance than where we've been in recent years.
Can I just ask the devil's advocate question, though, because I wonder if there are any concerns that these potential projects will lose something by not having the added scrutiny, public input from design review. I'm hearing you loud and clear on the positive implications here, but do you see any drawbacks from this plan for design review exemption?
Very little, and I think we can, over these next 3 years,
Assess it, right?
learn and assess and come back to it. These aren't permanent decisions, and we should be assessing what the implications are. But I think on balance, they're going to be very positive ones.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on, if I could, with you, John, here to talk about another issue. You work so hard to tell the story of downtown Seattle. I have seen the positive trends on DSA's revitalization dashboard. Excellent resource. Highly recommend it, folks, if you're checking it out. But I do want to reckon that with what I saw as, I guess I'd have to say, a mixed economic forecast from the city of Seattle that was put out last week by its budget experts. You got tax revenues from Jumpstart, the payroll expense tax for big businesses. Those are up. Same news for real estate excise taxes, short-term rental taxes. But the biggest drivers of our local economy, sales taxes, business and occupation taxes, are down to the point where the latest general fund revenue forecast for the city shows a $48.6 million decrease from 2024 to 26, adding to an already concerning $250 million deficit. John, I just wanted your take on that forecast. What did you make of it?
Well, aligning our spending with our revenues is critical, and our spending over the last 10 years in the city has gone way up at a pace that's much greater than the increase in inflation. So we're collecting more money today than we ever have before, but our costs are higher. So we can't have everything we want, and we've got to live within the means of the taxes we're bringing in. And I think the best way to grow the pie and raise revenue is to get more businesses located in our city. We need to be incentivizing economic activity. That's job creation, and those folks are then spending money in our community. It's property taxes that are being collected, B&O taxes. So we're going to get out of this and have a stable economy and tax base by growing the tax base, because we're sort of running out of additional taxes and fees we can levy. And voters and the business community have been pretty generous over the last decade in raising all kinds of taxes and agreeing to do so. But I think we ought to be focused now on how do we grow economic opportunity, grow the economic pie in our city, and spread the cost among more people and more economic activity versus spreading more taxes on the folks that are here today.
Got it. I did want to reference back to our discussion about design review. Construction has slowed significantly, and that's a big driver of sales taxes from September of last year to September of this year. And again, I'm looking at city numbers here. The value of the permits issued for construction was about $2.6 billion, which is 40% less than what Seattle averaged from 2016 to 2019. Can you talk to me about your thoughts about that trend in construction here in the city and how Seattle can turn it around?
Yeah, over these last 20 years, I mean, we've had more investment and development in our city than, probably any 20-year period in our history. And, Amazon's growth was a big part of that. They attracted lots of other companies to locate engineering offices here and satellite offices that then grew into hundreds, if not thousands, of people and employees in those spaces. And then that attracted a lot of investment in residential development because a lot of those employees wanted to live close to where they worked and wanted to live in the urban core. So we were rocking and rolling for 20 years. And I don't know that anybody expected it to go on for another 20, right. But certainly the pandemic and the increased inflation and interest rates brought a lot of that investment to a slower pace. So I think we will get back to a more normalized level of investment in our city. We're probably not going to see the same levels that we saw and shouldn't expect to see the same levels as we saw over these last 20 years. But Seattle remains a desirable place for folks to invest. A couple months ago, Holland Development broke ground on another housing project, Tower Downtown, after having really strong performance on leasing up a building they opened earlier this year. So Seattle's still desirable despite the headwinds from high interest rates and high construction costs. And I think we need to be more reasonable about the level of development we can expect over the next decade and plan accordingly.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess you live and breathe this stuff, John. Are there certain metrics that you're hearing about and you're studying that indicate some different signs of life downtown? And I mean that in a positive way, because I know there's been some good trends there. We're going to touch on returning to work in a little bit, but what other things are you seeing there that show some good signs to you about downtown?
Yeah, the bright spots have been one, a record number of people living downtown, and we still have 6,000 plus units under construction, which is more than just about any downtown west of Chicago. So the residential storyline is a really strong one. Visitors are back in our city, back in our downtown at numbers comparable to 2019, particularly in the summer season, near record cruise season this year. We expect nearly 300 boats to come through Seattle next season, which will be a new record. So the visitor industry, which is really important to our city, is really helping to stabilize small business, think cafes and restaurants, but also hotels and arts and cultural attractions as well, and that benefit from visitors. So the return of residents and the return of visitors have been two really strong storylines for our downtown and for the entire city.
Very true. All right, we're going to talk about another metric that I know is a concern for John and for everybody else around our area. It is time to get back to work. Employees of Amazon have to take that literally when it comes to heading into the office in January, 5 days a week. How is that going to affect Seattle? It's time for us to punch the clock and discuss the details coming up on Now Hear This. Well, in case you hadn't heard, folks, Amazon CEO Andy Jassy has informed his employees in Seattle they're going to be returning to work 5 days a week starting January 2nd of next year. As you might imagine, that has caused some different reactions among the company's roughly 50,000 workers in Seattle. But returning to in-person work is part of a trend that Mayor Harrell spoke about in his State of the City address back in February. His downtown activation plan is encouraging more people to live downtown and come back to work downtown, too.
Our downtown activation plan is gaining momentum as we activate downtown. Here are some statistics. More than 106,000 residents are now living downtown. Over 80,000 workers come to their offices Monday through Friday. Let me repeat that, Monday through Friday.
John, you've spoken to the press about this. You called this policy from Amazon to get people back to work 5 days a week a home run for downtown. So let's touch all the bases here if we could. What effect do you think Amazon's return to work is this policy? What do you think it's going to be?
It's going to mean more customers for small businesses around their campus and throughout downtown. And I think it's going to be influential to other employers' decisions around increasing their in-office requirements. And we saw that to a degree after Amazon came back to 3 days a week. And I think we'll see it as well once they come back to 5. And I think already having some influence based on their announcement. And I think it's a trend that will continue. I think employers, and certainly we believe, we're better together. And the office is still very relevant to creating great culture and strategy and to great companies and organizations and their performance. And being downtown is as well. I mean, I think whether you're together in the office or you're together in the other places, you can be together as a team, as a company, as an organization in the downtown environment. That's good for your culture. It's good for your customers and clients. And more companies are making those decisions. Amazon being the biggest employer in our city and the biggest in downtown, when they make those decisions, lots of other people feel it in really good ways.
And it's going to affect the return to work numbers, I would imagine, which I know are lagging behind other big cities. Can you touch on that issue, please, John? Because I know you study this very closely. You want to make sure that there are offices that are occupied, et cetera. What have you been seeing? What trends are you looking at right now?
Yeah, we're at about 58% of folks back in their offices 3 days a week or more relative to the same period in 2019. And for the last 6 months, we've had around 90,000 average daily workers. And that's been the best performance since February of 2020, but we still have a ways to go to get back to or close to those numbers from 2019. And we do lag a number of other cities around the country that move back into the office and into their urban cores faster than we have. Mm-hmm. And, if you relied on public transit to get a lot of workers here and you had public health restrictions in longer than other cities, those two factors seem to have played a pretty significant role in slowing the return to office. But I think it's been clear all along what leaders of organizations and teams believe when it comes to where they do their best work. Their ability and sort of decision making on when they were going to implement those requirements has evolved, but it's been pretty clear since mid-2020 what folks who are in decision making roles largely believe. Not everybody. There's certainly companies that have gone fully remote or may stay in a hybrid arrangement for some time, but I think there's a lot of momentum about being back together because people believe we're better together.
I agree. In many ways, I know it's been happening at the city of Seattle in terms of employees coming back to work there. But if I can go down that path a little bit further with you, John Talton, wrote about this in the Seattle Times. You got companies like Microsoft on the east side of Lake Washington saying, hey, if productivity doesn't go down, we don't need to change our in-person work policy. You don't need to come in every day. Are you concerned at all that other companies that offer remote work in other cities could be more attractive to workers who might not want to have to come into work 5 days a week? How do you wrestle with that?
I think downtowns are going to continue to compete with the advantages and assets that made them desirable places for workers and everybody else before the pandemic. And those are, assets and amenities that may not be attractive and enticing to every employee in the workforce, but are attractive to lots of folks. The ability to go out to a great happy hour with your colleagues after work, or take in a Mariner game, or go to the new opening at the Seattle Art Museum, and not have to get in your car and drive 30 minutes to do that, but wander down the street. The ability to be in the incredible atmosphere that's going to be created when we host World Cup in June of 2026 for 5 or 6 weeks, when you got 750,000 soccer fans from around the world that descend on Seattle. I mean, that's going to be an experience and environment that you're not going to get in a suburban office campus. You're going to get it in the middle of downtown. And so those advantages and assets and attributes are the same as they were pre-pandemic, and really only getting better as we open up the new waterfront and we are hosting major events like World Cup and others. So I'm not too concerned, because I think there's still a strong preference among lots of employees, particularly young folks, to want to be where the action is, and the action's in our downtowns.
I hear you. And I'll touch on the waterfront in just a little bit, but last touch on this. Do you think activity like this, Amazon bringing people back to work, perhaps other businesses, are we ready for it? Is this going to be hopefully something that'll bring more people back on public transit like King County Metro, and be that kind of impetus that agencies like that need? I was just trying to track what you're keeping an eye on as this happens in January. What are you looking at, John?
Yeah, we're absolutely ready for it. The streets are safer and more welcoming than they were 3 years ago. There's fewer attendant campants in downtown, more people getting helped off the street. Violent crime is down. We have, transit capacity and service today that didn't exist a year ago. A new rapid ride line between downtown and Madison Valley, light rail to Linwood. We've got more security officers on the trains and buses and at the stations, along with fare ambassadors, than we had 2 years ago. So lots of great work by the public sector and the private sector working together over these last couple of years to welcome workers back, but everybody else as well.
Yeah, good points all. And I wanted to make sure I talked about this major issue here when we talk about a milestone for the city of Seattle, the opening of Overlook Park down on the waterfront. I've talked about this on the podcast in the last couple of weeks, but I really wanted to get your perspective as someone who has lived and breathed downtown mega projects for the last couple of decades, John. How big of a project is this? What impact do you see it having on Seattle?
It's huge, and it's already had significant impacts. In the first week the Overlook Walk was open, we saw a 140% increase in pedestrian volumes in that area of town relative to the year prior for that same week. The attendance at the new aquarium is double what it was in the same period last year. So people are coming to check these new spaces and experiences out, and there's more that's coming. We're opening up additional elements of the waterfront park between now and February, March of next year, when the entire deal will be done. And it's really more than just opening up a new park. We're opening up a new part of our city, a whole new set of experiences that didn't exist in the same way before, and the ability to sort of come and linger and wander with beautiful natural environment on one side with the Olympics in Elliott Bay, and this great downtown and urban environment on the other, and a farmer's market and a historic neighborhood in Pioneer Square and an outdoor sculpture park and this incredible aquarium, and now a bunch of kids' play areas and ways to ride and walk that are safe and delightful. These aren't experiences you can really get anywhere else in this region or state, and it's a pretty unique waterfront experience for most downtowns. So I think it's going to be tremendous for our downtown and for our city and for the region.
What was it like for you, John? I know you've taken a walk up there. I mean, and people really have been talking about this for more than a decade. And I know you've been working on it with the DSA for more than a decade. What was it like for you personally to see that view, I guess?
It's phenomenal. I think it's the new iconic spot in our city. No offense to Cary Park and the great view that it has of our skyline, but This is pretty spectacular because you see our city in a whole new way. We certainly had that view to a degree when you were speeding north on the viaduct, but you were generally sort of looking out over the water, and it went by pretty quickly.
I always kept my eyes on the road, but
yeah, unless you were uber safe and keeping your eyes on the road like you do.
Right.
But now you can stand still in one place, soak in that view as long as you want. And the view back to the city, back to the skyline, the view you have now of Pioneer Square and the historic buildings there butted up against the more modern buildings is pretty wonderful. And I think it helps people maybe get reacquainted and reappreciate all the things they already loved about Seattle. And it reminds us how unique this place is to have that natural beauty. You're looking at a national park to the west, and then when you can see Mount Rainier, you've seen another national park, and then the Space Needle, and then this beautiful skyline. It reminds us how special a place this really is.
Absolutely. And can you touch on some of the things that are going to be happening in the future? You mentioned a few. I was just trying to figure out activating this space and keeping it safe. Can you talk about some of these long-term plans ahead for Overlook Park? Because it's a gem of a resource. I know the city wants to keep it that way.
Yeah, lots of activities and farmers markets and festivals and music, and some of that's already been happening on Pier 62, which has been open for a couple of years now, but more to come when it comes to programming and events on this beautiful new space. And then more elements of this project will open over the next several months, including some pretty incredible play areas for kids with, I think, the best view in Seattle of any play area hanging over the waterfront there. And then north of Pier 62, we're facilitating $50 million of investment from 3 philanthropists that will really extend the waterfront park project up to Myrtle Edwards and Centennial parks and through the Olympic Sculpture Park. So you're going to be able to go from the Expedia campus at the north, the Smith Cove area, all the way down to Pioneer Square, 3.5 miles of a protected, safe, green, lush experience to walk or ride, stroll, and then have all those great things that have been there for many years, like the market and Pioneer Square and the Sculpture Park along the way, but lots of new programs and activities and events that haven't been there because we had a double-decker highway and not a lot of space for pedestrians.
I know it's amazing to think about what that was and what it's turned into. It takes me a little while to even stand up there as I have and recognize what's been going on there. With that project you're talking about, that bigger connection with Smith Cove, et cetera, is there a timeline on that yet, John?
That work will begin in the first quarter of 2025, and with it will come a new concession, so a place to get food and drink in Centennial Park, restroom facilities there as well, which don't really exist today, improve beaches and bike paths to make it safer for cyclists and people who just want to walk through the park, and then additional seating, landscaping. That work will be done by June of 2026 and begins early next year.
Awesome. Well, I'm very much looking forward to that, and thanks for the breakdown there. All right, we've got something coming up here. One of our patrons had an interesting question for you, John, that I wanted to pass along. We're going to delve into the details coming up on You Ask, We Answer. Yes, we are back with You Ask, We Answer. This is a great part of the program that features questions from show patrons only, so be a patron and jump in on this. Great reason to support the show, if I do say so myself. My patron Eric had a question for you, John. Here it is. It was fantastic when you interviewed Harold Danley as he was retiring from the Clean Team. Editor's note, this was back in October of 2022 on John's podcast. It was great to hear from somebody with hands-on experience that does not have an agenda or something to sell. Nobody is as authentic as when they are retiring, and we'd never hear his voice otherwise. You also did a great job getting him to open up a bit. Here's a brief clip of the episode.
What advice would you have for someone that's coming in to the job? And we're trying to hire a lot of people right now to be on the Clean Team. What advice do you have for after 17 years of doing this work downtown for them?
Be honest as far as what you want to do and how you can do it. In other words, if I can do this job, if you want to do this job, be honest about it. Like, don't come in and say, well, I just want a paycheck, because it's not going to work for you. Come in and say, okay, I can do this. I don't mind doing this, and I'll have fun doing this, and you'll be here forever.
John, my patron Eric is asking this. Any chance you could do more exit interviews like this one? What do you got?
Well, I don't want anybody to exit. So Harold was with us
right.
for 18 years or so, and we're trying to hang on to everybody we got.
Yeah.
And he was a terrific member of our team, and we got 165 full-time ambassadors like Harold, and they do incredible work each and every day. And so we're
break
trying
down
to
what
hang
the
on
clean
to
team
them.
is. Can you touch on that real quick, please?
Yeah, 101 of those 165 are folks that are cleaning the streets every day and sidewalks, public areas, taking graffiti off things, pressure washing, picking up leaves and trash and litter. And then another team that is helping to activate our parks downtown, and additional group of ambassadors that are helping people in need, providing directions, walking with people to their transit stop, a variety of services. But boots on the ground presence, 362 days a year, 7 days a week, 6 a.m. to 9:30, working to make downtown safe and clean and welcoming for everybody. And nobody did it much better than Harold. He's a great member of our team.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on the Seattle City Makers podcast. You've been doing it, you said, for 3 years now, and I guess I just wanted to talk about what that was like. Are people stopping you on the street and saying, "Hey, aren't you John Scholes from the Seattle City Makers podcast?" Or what's it been like?
Well, I got no video for ours. We're just audio, so maybe not as recognizable, Brian. But
Yeah,
we've really
you there.
enjoyed it, and we, coming out of COVID, we thought bringing people closer together, helping people to get to know folks they might know through the media or reading a story, or they might have been acquainted with them, but trying to get to know people that love and care about our city, are making great things happen, help them get to know each other a little bit better, would only over time produce great things for our city. So that's a bit of the premise of it, and I think it is helping people get connected and learn about the story of a wine bar they might have gone to for 3-4 years, but never quite understood how it came to be and who the owner was, and what brought them to create that great experience. So that's a little bit of what we're trying to do, and we're having fun doing it.
Yeah, when Joe Fougere from Tutabella brought a pizza to Barack Obama. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff there. Challenges of doing it, John. Favorite parts of podcasting. What's on your mind with it?
I just love all that I get to learn, and I've always been a naturally curious person. So if only 3 people listen to this, my mom and my 2 kids, when I make them in the truck, I'm still a happy guy, because I've walked out of that 45-minute conversation, much like you do, interviewing people, with a lot more knowledge than I did when I came in. So we talked to Dr. Elizabeth Waco, the CEO of Swedish, today, and we'll be publishing that in a few weeks. And I learned a lot about the healthcare space and all that she's tackling, and how she got here. And she's got a great story. So I love the ability to learn.
Well, and also just have a conversation too. That's what I've really valued about it, because it just feels a lot more intimate than, for me at least, putting together a news story and picking out sound bites or whatever else. You can really let people express themselves. I've really enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, I think there's something real special about this medium of podcasting and long form, in-depth stories. It sort of runs against the grain of a lot of other sources of information that have proliferated over these last several years. And it's why I like it. And I'm glad a few people are listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, this has been a real treat. I really appreciate you being on the show with me. We do need to wrap up, though. We had one last question from one of our other patrons, Rob, who asks this. Here we go. What is the DSA's pitch as to why someone should open a small business or franchise downtown today? What do you got, John?
Because we are a great place to visit. We got more people living here than ever before, and more people coming to the units that are opening here over the next 2 years. And we continue to draw people back to work. And we got a lot to look forward to with the new waterfront, return of the NBA, great sports town, great music town. And I think our best days are ahead of us. And no doubt we face some challenges, but we're opening more businesses than they're closing. And there's more people coming each and every day to downtown. So those are customers for that potential business.
Got it. Real quick on that. Have you heard something that I haven't heard on the NBA returning to town? Because I keep waiting for someone to drop the knowledge on me. Do you know something, John? Because you got to tell me if you do.
We would never get ahead of the NBA or the commissioner or the board of governors, but it sure seems like they're getting closer to an expansion decision sometime early next year.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And John, I'm looking forward to talking with you again. I really appreciate being on the program. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Thank you, John. Thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. Jan, thank you so much for jumping on board this past week as a patron. If you are not a patron, join us. Find the podcast, I should say, on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. You can hear us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to listen. We are there. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.